Welcome to another episode of Parent Quick Smarts. This video will cover finding the volume of rectangular prisms for grade 5. You may remember determining volume from when you were in school as using that old formula. Volume equals length times width times height. You just plug in the numbers and multiply, and whatever you got was the solution in cubic units. But most of us never learned why or how this worked. We want our students in 5th grade to develop a deeper understanding of how and why this formula works. In 5th grade, our students will need to understand the concept of volume. What is volume, and why do we use cubic units to measure it? They will also need to recognize volume as being additive. We want them to see that a rectangular prism can be broken into equal-sized layers whose volumes can then be added together in order to determine the total amount of space occupied by the figure. And we want our students to be able to determine and use the volume formulas. Volume equals length times width times height, and volume equals the area of the base, capital B, times the height, and then determine when it makes sense to use each formula. The first thing that we want to cover with students in 5th grade is an understanding of what volume is. Volume is the amount of space that an object occupies. Our math students will specifically be finding the volume of rectangular prisms and figures composed of rectangular prisms. We might ask our students how they could determine the amount of space that is occupied by this box. When measuring volume, we would use a cubic unit, which is a unit where all sides are equal lengths, and it covers all 3 dimensions of space, length, width, and height equally. It could also be notated as a unit cubed. If we are measuring the space that this rectangular prism-shaped box occupies, a student might simply suggest that we fill it to determine how many cubic units would fit. We could then count the units and determine that this rectangular prism occupies 20 cubic units of space, or that it has a volume of 20 cubic units. We want our students to build on their understanding of what volume is to determine a more efficient or quicker way to determine the volume for a rectangular prism. If we look at this rectangular prism, rather than spending time counting each individual cube, a student may be able to see that the prism can be chopped into 4 equal layers stacked on top of each other. Each layer would have the same area as the base of the figure, which is 3 units by 3 units, for a total of 9 square units of area. Each of these layers is 1 unit high, which would allow us to fit 9 cubic units into each layer. If we add each of the 4 9 cubic unit layers together, 9 cubic units plus 9 cubic units plus 9 cubic units plus 9 cubic units, it would give us a total of 36 cubic units of volume for the entire rectangular prism. A student should then be able to see that the volume of a rectangular prism can be determined by finding the area of the base, represented by a capital B, and multiplying it by the number of layers or height of the prism. Students should also see that in order to find the area of the big B or base, they multiply the length and the width of that base together, and then take that product and multiply it by the number of layers or the height, which would give them the formula volume equals length times width times height of the rectangular prism. And if you plug in the volumes for each of the values for each of the dimensions, you could see that 3 times 3 would give you 9, times 4 for the height would give you a total of 36 cubic units of volume for a rectangular prism. As your child builds their understanding of volume, some questions that you could ask them about their work to help them are, What does the volume of an object represent? How can you determine the volume of a rectangular prism? And when would it make sense to use the formula volume equals the area of the base times the height to determine volume? Some ways that you could have your student practice their skill at determining volume in the real world are looking at the volume of boxes. If you are storing boxes of an equal size, have your child determine what volume of space would be required to fit all of them. Build a rectangular prism out of cubic bricks and have your child determine the volume without taking it apart. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Parent Quick Smarts. Remember, the best way that you can help your child in math is to keep in communication with their teacher. For further support, check out the links www.thinkcentral.com and elementarymath.mysdhc.org. See you next episode.